Good day and welcome back to The Shed. Today we go back to 2007 to take a look at the Hugo award-winning novel by an author who's featured a couple of times on our SCI-FI Shed ladder, where I've been ranking all the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels, in Vernor Vinge's Rainbow's End. So what I would like to do is provide a spoiler-free plot overview. I'll talk to what I liked and what I didn't like. I'll put this one to the memory test, I'll make some recommendations, and we'll rank it on our ever-growing SCI-FI Shed ladder. So the novel is set in the near future, and it tells the story of this guy called Robert Gu, who was once a famous poet who's recovering from Alzheimer's thanks to a new revolutionary technological treatment. And Robert is a rather interesting kind of person because he's got a very caustic personality, but he's also got a very sharp intellect. And he's really suffering going through this treatment where he just can't seem to reintegrate into this advanced future that has all this augmented reality and AI and technological advancements. So he's finding it really difficult to integrate. And one of the people that are helping him try to integrate back into his society is his granddaughter called Miri, and she's got a rather pivotal role to play in this whole scenario as well. So the novel is really about family conflict in many ways. But anyway, Robert is finding it difficult, and he decides to enroll himself into this high school that is meant to help these older people going through this treatment to reintegrate back into society. In the meanwhile, we have this intelligence operation at play that is made up of highly ranked officials from across the globe, and it doesn't take long before Robert's journey and this intelligence operations come to an intersect in the form of this guy known as the mysterious stranger who appears to Robert in this augmented reality world as a rabbit. And it really comes down to this dramatic end where we have the fate of literature as we know it against this ever-growing digital world. So what is there to like in Vernor Vinge's Rainbow's End? For me, it would have to be some of the themes that are covered in this particular novel. And one that stood out to me would have to be the technological singularity and augmented reality world that Vernor Vinge has painted here for us. Because sometimes I really wonder if we're not already there. And technological singularity is really the concept where technology is got to a point that is uncontrollable and irreversible. And sometimes I wonder if we're just not quite there with AI and the way it's going, and whether or not it's already at that point. And I really like the point that Vernor Vinge was making in this novel, and one that resonated with me. The other thing I really enjoyed was the fate of books, like the ones behind me, physical books, in an ever-growing digital world. I really enjoyed that, and one of the things I really enjoy about reading is that tangible feel. And there was a period back in the 2010s or so, the 2020s almost, where I was almost just exclusively reading digital books, and it was books like this one by Vernor Vinge in Rainbow's End, as well as Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, that sparked something in my head to say, I really don't want to see these books disappear from the face of the planet, right? I mean, there is something to say about digital books, and I do read digital books from time to time. Rainbow's End I actually read on my Kindle this time around because I don't have it in paperback behind me. But again, I like that concept of, what is the fate of these well-loved and vintage books that we have behind us in that digital world, and do they still have a place? That's something that resonated with me and I wanted to share with you. Another thing that I really enjoyed was the hope that one day something like Alzheimer's could actually be treated. Now, I go to a nursing home, for those of you who are not familiar, I'm not quite sure what the terminology is across the globe, but in Australia we refer to old people community centres where old people can get all the care and nursing that they require. We call those things a nursing home here in Australia. And I have the privilege, I would say, that I am able to visit a nursing home about 5 times a week. And I've grown to love some of the residents there who are suffering from Alzheimer's. And it's a terrible thing to witness on a day-to-day basis, because you still see the beauty that made these people individuals and just the respect I think we owe them. They're just wonderful. We should so be doing more for our elderly population. But anyway, let me get off my soapbox. But I like the hope that it gave us, right? And in some ways, this novel was about identity and how one identifies themselves when, you come to be reawakened in many ways into a world that is different from you, struggling with identity and memory, and what ultimately makes you adapt to these situations. So I really enjoyed that concept as well. So what is there not to like in Vernor Vinge's Rainbow's End? Look, for this one, it's a reoccurring theme for me when it comes to Vernor Vinge. At times I feel his novels are a little bit too padded out. I think there are issues with pacing, where sometimes there's a whole lot of deep introspective views on these characters, and other times there's a whole lot of really quick paced action themes, and I just found that the pacing didn't quite work for me. And at times, if I'm completely honest, it made it a little bit boring. And I've shared that criticism in the past of other Vernor Vinge's novels. But look, I don't want to make a big deal of it, because I think a lot of it was my problem, honestly, with this one. And one of the reasons being is that I'm a cybersecurity professional. I'm not quite sure if I've ever mentioned that on this channel, but I work in the cybersecurity field. And I don't know, many times through this novel, and I can appreciate what Vernor Vinge was doing, but so much of it I just couldn't help but critique and challenge and come up with better solutions to some of the conflict that they had. But look, that's just me, and sometimes I just felt like I'm just at work reading this novel, and it took away from some of my enjoyment. But on the flip side of that, I'd say that he's done a pretty good job of explaining some future technologies, and I don't think he was too far off the mark either. So I think that one, I'm sitting on the fence as whether or not it's a criticism or not. I think it's a personal reflection of how I felt. So I'll leave it up to you to make up your own mind when you read this one. Having said that though, I do feel that this novel suffers from character development. I think apart from the main character and Robert Gu, he went through a pretty big character arc. I'd have to say that is not very true of some of the other supporting cast. I just don't feel like the characters really did anything for me. There was just not enough substance in these characters for me to become emotionally attached to them. That took away from my overall enjoyment. And that would go straight into my memory test as well. Because when it comes to the memory test, for me, if I can't get emotionally invested in these characters, they just become forgettable. And I'm afraid to say that that was exactly my experience with this one. I just don't think the characters had enough in them for them to be memorable. I last read Vernor Vinge's Rainbow's End. It would have been about 10-15 years ago, and I can honestly say this time around I couldn't remember the characters at all, or what they brought to the table. So I'd have to say that was a bit of a letdown for me. The other thing that I would have to say is the plot overall again didn't really hold my attention, which also made it suffer when it comes to the memory test, because it read like a new book when it comes to the plot in many ways. I don't think there was enough foresight or technological advancements from what we had in 2006 to this near future that Vernor Vinge talked about for me to be excited about. I just don't I don't know. I like science fiction books that really push the envelope, and this one didn't really do it when it comes to technology elements. That sort of made it suffer when it comes to the memory test. I just don't think there was anything really revolutionary or visionary in what Vernor Vinge brought in this world for it to hold to the memory test. So having said all of that, can I still recommend Vernor Vinge's Rainbow's End? And I think the answer is yes. I think some of the issues I had with this novels were personal ones, having been in the industry, in a field that even in 2006, envisioning what Vernor Vinge saw in his novel wasn't too much of a stretch of an imagination for me. So that aside, I think it's still a very worthwhile read. But if I was to recommend other Hugo award-winning novels that we've read and ranked to date on the board, I'd have to say I'd probably recommend Vernor Vinge's A Deepness in the Sky and A Fire Upon the Deep over Rainbow's End. I think they're slightly better novels than what we found in Rainbow's End, but I think if you liked one or the other, you will still enjoy Rainbow's End. Another interesting note is that the tines and the zone of thoughts, which are in these two wonderful novels here, also play a sentence or two in Rainbow's End as well. Now, one other interesting recommendation that I'll make, which is nothing at all related, apart from the fact that in this novel that we have in Rainbow's End, There's a whole lot of really interesting, almost religious movements that are happening on the planet, and they take the forms and names from great and some fictional and non-fictional characters, one of which was H.P. Lovecraft, as well as Terry Pratchett. So I thought that was rather cool, because I'm a big Terry Pratchett fan, and I'm holding up Mort here, which is probably one of my favorite Terry Pratchett novels. But if you read Rainbow's Edge, and you've yet to read Terry Pratchett, and you want to sort of understand, well, who are these people following? What is this movement about? I say have a go at Terry Pratchett, one of my all-time favorite humor fantasy writers of all time, and I'd probably say have a go at Mort as a good place to start. I think it's a wonderful intro into the Discworld novels. So there you have it. We've got to rank it on the ever-growing Sci-Fi Shed ladder. So let me flip the cameras around. It'll be really interesting to see where this one lands tonight. So we're back to the Shed ladder and ranking today's 2007 Hugo award-winning novel by Vernor Vinge, Rainbow's End. So it's going to be interesting to see where this one lands when I apply my full criteria down below. And right now we're looking at the A side, and I guess a good place to start would be A Fire Upon the Deep by Vernor Vinge. Now, I'd have to say that the concept in this one, the zones of thought, I thought was a really brilliant concept. I thought there were some issues with that novel when it comes to the padding and sometimes the pacing issues that I've talked about in the past. But I've got to say that A Fire Upon the Deep, for me, conceptually, was a much better novel than what we found in Rainbow's End. And when we have novels like Jonathan Strange, which is just brilliantly written novels, and, you know, tear-jerking novels like Flowers for Algernon, I just don't see this one sitting on the A side of the board. So let me flip the cameras, rather the board around and see where this one lands on the B side. So on the B side, it's looking promising because we've got some classic space operas in here, like Vinge's A Deepness in the Sky, Startide Rising by David Brin. We got wonderful novels like Man Plus and Babel 17, and some wonderful character-driven novels like Barrier, Nettle and Bone. Just wonderful novels. But I don't think this one is going to land on the top end of the board. And it's mainly down to the concept and those characters for me. I thought the writing was fine. I had no issues with Vernor Vinge's writing, which I always feel is a wonderful writer, Vernor Vinge. And I think the ideas were great, and I wonder how much this is really my problem than it is Vernor Vinge's problem. But I'm going to stick to my criteria, which was this really reflecting how much I enjoyed these novels overall. So I think I'm going to look towards the bottom of the bunch here. And I'm going to have to say again, this is going to be better than the Stone Earth series that we saw in N.K. Jemisin. I think it still is a better concept than what we saw in Slow River, as well as Falling Woman and The Healer's Wall. So we're really talking anywhere between Down Below Station, Timescape, and No Enemy But Time. It could be really anywhere between these, but I've made up my mind, and I'm going to give it to Vernor Vinge over Down Below Station, and it really comes down to the writing. I didn't really enjoy Down Below Station. There was a couple of issues that I've had with that novel, and you can see my full review, which I'll link down below. But I guess this is where I feel comfortable tonight, having Vernor Vinge's final Hugo award-winning novel on the board, read and ranked, sitting just above Down Below Station, which I think is a really good place to be, right? These are all wonderful novels, and I did enjoy my time reading Rainbow's End. Have you read it? Have you read any of the other Vernor Vinge novels? What are your thoughts on Vernor Vinge? I think, honestly, these are just the 3 novels that I've read by Vernor Vinge. I've got a couple more behind me here in the stack that I'm looking forward to reading afresh and anew in the coming years. But I'd love to hear your recommendations. Would you recommend any other Vernor Vinge novels? Which is your favorite Vernor Vinge novel? Do you agree with my ranking? Do you think that this is just not even should have been on the board at all? Or do you think it should have been somewhere further up? I'd love to hear from you as always. I've been Peter. This has been The Shed. I can't believe we're hearing my notification go off, which means I've got to say goodbye. I'll see you next time in The Shed.